Hi guys, I thought I'd continue with part two about my father's uh, past in Yugoslavia, and also with when he arrived to Australia, the things he spoke about when he was a kid. Not a kid, he was growing up by then. It would have been late 20s, around 30 by the time he got out to Australia. Um, so, but I watched the other video earlier, and I remembered a few more things that I should have included. So I'm going to quickly just go on to them before I go finish off the Yugoslavian life before we went out to Australia. So yeah, I got to mention that also there was the period where when he was in the army, we mentioned that in the barracks when they were getting the food was that terrible that everybody used to complain about the food when it came out. Dad got fed up and he went back into the kitchen and he started talking to the chefs and the leading officer or NCO in charge of the kitchen. And he goes, look, he saw all the ingredients were there that they could make good food, but the cook just didn't know how to mix the spices and the basics. And he goes, look, I'd like to help you guys, with the cooking because a lot of guys are complaining, and you got all the ingredients, and why don't we work together and get some at least make our lives a bit more enjoyable if we're in the army. And he had a kind of a charismatic, witty way of putting things across to people, a bit of a larrikin. So he ended up just jumping next to the cook and started cooking, helping the cook mix up, the different, because there's a routine when you make a stew or anything. You got to know how to saute, or how much garlic, how much onion, how much spice, sugar, everything. You got to know when to put it and how to put it in, and not too much. Anyway, so Dad got in there and started helping him. And he actually he trained up the cooks how to cook because he learnt a lot of recipes from his mother. Mother was a really good cook. And so, yeah, and everybody applauded him for for this. And actually, word got around and they even asked if he could go to the officers' mess. So because the officers were coming eating in the normal guys, because they usually have the NCO where the non-commissioned officers go. And then the officers' mess, where the quality food is for the officers. So they have two different separate. And some of the officers were coming across to eat in the NCO's kitchen, or mess, they usually call them. And then when I found out Dad was helping them, the cooks, they asked him to go over to the other kitchen as well to train them up. So it was pretty interesting to hear that. So that was a bit of an interesting event in the army he mentioned. And there was another one I mentioned where they were working in a workshop, and this is when the commies or socialists, there was a change. He was an apprentice when he would have been studying his apprenticeship when in the World War II, and then by the time he got into some of the workshops, they put a lot of these communist socialists, like guys in who had no idea about how to manage a workshop, and some of them were real assholes. And he mentioned about this one particular one that he had power control over everyone. So Dad and that used to play practical jokes on him, just to get rid of their frustrations. And he was the one where my dad eventually phoned up because he got a phone number off President Tito, to ring, and that was with the guy they rang up, and they relocated to another part of Yugoslavia. Forgot to mention that. What they did was they ran a circuit into the door to the workshop, to the knob of the doorknob. And what there was a little wire here connected. You can flick it. You can flick it with just on the top of the door. Just walk over, flick it, or connect it with your fingers. And if someone was coming in, they wanted to zap with the doorknob, they'd tick it on, and then he would have grabbed a knob and get an electric shock, you know. Not enough to kill him, just enough to give him a jolt, you know. And so what he did was, I used to have a lookout for when he came, this particular idiot. And so as he was walking, they'd give a signal, and Dad would quickly run over and flick the little wire. And then the guy would come and he'd zap and he'd start screaming, you know, what the hell's going on? Everybody look at him as if, what are you talking about? What's wrong, you know? And then as the guy jumped, as Dad walked over, he didn't realise Dad then flicked that wire back. It was just a little wire. Disconnected it. He goes, what's wrong? And then he walked over, opened and closed the door. What's wrong? There's nothing wrong here. It must be static electricity in your shoes or something. Something like that. And so they did this several times, you know, to the idiot. And to the point where he stopped going to the workshop. He used to yell for other people to open the door. So, but it was a bit of entertainment for the boys in the workshop. Another one I used to do, he told me that they got this 45-gallon drum of some sort, and they put some kind of I don't know, some kind of something in it, which you'd sit on top of the 45-gallon drum, and then it would project you up in the air. So they used to kind of squat on top of it, and then it'd be like a little rocket. And then they'd shoot the 45-gallon drum in the air. They used to do crazy things like that. So that was another thing he mentioned about when he was in the workshop. But yeah, even back then, their workshop had a good reputation for quality work, fixing. And he said some of the machining and because they used to do a lot of ship engines and all kind of tank. Trucks, they used to have to machine out a lot of different size engines and motors and flywheels, and so yeah, it would have been pretty interesting machinery. So you got a lot of experience from there before we went out to Australia. You got really familiar with the different quality metals, and he also learned blacksmithing off my uncle, because my uncle had a blacksmith shop. So yeah. Another thing he was mentioning when because during the war, before the end of World War II, the US used to do bombing raids into Hungary, and they saw or Budapest. Actually, Mum used to be part of those bombing raids in Budapest, where they all went under the metro. Metros were deep underground. Quite a few, I don't know, about 30 meters under the ground or something more. I don't know. Just guessing. I'm just guessing that. And then and Dad used to be out on the fields, you know, and then you see huge squadrons of bombers going up towards Hungary. Just you can see just squadrons and squadrons of them going over the country. They used to come up from Greece over the Balkans, because by then they already occupied Greece, the US and allies. So yeah, he saw those big squadrons heading up towards Hungary. Budapest used to bomb the shit out of it, and there was that's right. And when after World War II, all the Germans, there's 30% of the city of Nagybet was populated by Germans, and they had some relocation program where they sent them all back to Germany. Now these guys have been living there for over more than 100 years more. And because they came in under Maria Theresa period, they were located after they pushed out the Turks. So a lot of Germans came in then. And yeah, so they've been living there probably 2, 3 generations. And then they were asked to relocate. So these guys, as I said earlier, they were the most beautiful houses in the whole city. They really looked after their garden, maintained the homes, and then he said it was sad to see them sent away. And then then the Bosnian Serbs came in from the real Balkan part of Yugoslavia, and he said they were so uncultured. He said a lot of them they didn't even know how to use one of these fireplaces, because I don't know what they hid with down that area, but he said a lot of times they pulled up the floorboards, beautiful floorboards, and used them for firewood, and they just, yeah, I don't know, they just didn't have that pride, in their property. So yeah, he claims a lot of the houses got deteriorated afterwards. That's right, and he also, during the war and that, he was working on different boats that used to work along the Bega, the Tisa, and even the Danube. So he said they actually went all the way up the Danube to even to Budapest, but they couldn't get off the boat. They said they had to stay on the boat because yeah, I think customs didn't let them off, so they just viewed Budapest from the boats because they had strict custom laws back then, regulations. And then he also went down all the way down to the Nile, because if you go down the Black Sea across into the Adriatic, you can go down the Nile that way. And yeah, so he went all the way down the Nile as well towards Egypt. This would have been exciting times for that. But he also mentioned they used to have to pull out bodies, after the war from the rivers, the Bega, the Tisa. And he said the way you'd identify if it was a woman or a man is a woman, she would be floating with the bottom in the air because the pocket in the lower part would swell up, and then it would cause a pocket of air down low, and the bottom would be floating in the air, top of the water. While the man, if you saw his chest floating along, his lungs would not, because so his chest lungs would swell up with air, and then you see the floating with. If it was floating with the chest on top of the water, that was a man's body. The woman would be from the bottom. If you see the butt floating through the water, that's how you identify if it's a woman or man. Some of the horrific things they would have had to do, I should say. Let's see. I actually met her goddaughter too when I was in Serbia when I went. She was a really lovely lady. She would have been in her late 60s, 70, something like that. She introduced me to her neighbours as well, the Hungarian. I just surprised them. I knocked on the door. She goes, "Who are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm Peter." I think she got scared at first. I'm Peter Chekosh's son. She had a while before. It took a while to acknowledge what I was talking about, because she goes, "What?" Because my dad hadn't been there since he left in the 50s, late 50s, mid to late 50s. So, and then I explained to her, she was a bit cautious whether I was bullshitting or not. And then she let me in, and then because I told them all about my aunties and the whole family, and then eventually she started understanding. A lovely lady. And what I did was, I told her at the gate, and I said, "Look, you'd like to come back later?" And she said, "Yeah, come back tomorrow." I think it was the next day. Or no, I think I had to go back in the afternoon. in the evening. And in the meantime, um, yeah, then I spent a whole afternoon talking to her. You know, really cool. All the stories about her family, her husband. She had 2 or 3 sons. And she also reinforced a lot of my father's stories. And whatever she knew about her family, she spoke about. So that was cool. Lovely lady. Um, okay, so Dad went out to Australia, um, and the first part about his trip was he couldn't speak English, so a lot of the new Australians then they put you into just jobs. The government just threw you into jobs where they needed you, you know. And he had to work on the sugarcane fields in Ballina, down northern New South Wales. And he said it was a beautiful location, um, Wollumbar, and he said some of the floods, he couldn't believe some of the floods back those days. Used to just the valley from the Murwillumbah would come down and those areas would flood up really quickly. So it's mentioned about a lot of the landscape in the region at the time. But my cough has come back. Yeah, so he was sugarcane cutting. I think he did it for about 6 months. Then he had a gutful. It was just hot, stinking work. And he said by the end of the day you'd be black as black can be from because they used to burn a lot of the sugarcane, and then afterwards you come in and cut it, and then you'd be covered like black soot all the time, and you'd be scrubbing yourself all the time, you know. And he said it was shit work, you know. But that's what they offered him at the time because he couldn't speak English or nothing. They didn't know his skills yet. So, but what they did was another issue was the Australians then weren't aware of European geography and who was enemies, who were um, allies, and who were the enemies. So there was a lot of people coming from Yugoslavia, different parts, Greece, Italy, um, all parts of Europe. And what they did was they threw them into gangs, and a lot of times in the gangs they'd fight between each other, and they'd knife each other up, you know. And the Aussies didn't understand what's going on because for them they thought Europeans all came from the same basket. And my father noticed there's going to be trouble long term, so he talked to the managers of the sugarcane field in his broken English, you know, to try to explain to them, and he had a translator too, that look, you got to separate your gangs, put different gangs of who get on, then you won't have any problem, you know. So he actually did help them manage, like to put all the people together, like nationalities that got on and who didn't, you know, and get them to work separately. And that sorted out the problem, you know. But anyway, in the meantime, Dad started networking with they're trying to get out of there because he couldn't. He said, back-breaking work, you know, sugarcane cutting, and it didn't even pay that well. So he had a mate who was in Brisbane who I think they were Russian actually. He said spoke Russian, and it was a Ford Motor Company, you know, up at Spring Hill, and he had to go into a job interview, and they gave him they had a translator for him. He couldn't speak English properly. They told him to pull the motor apart, diagnose it, and put it back together. It had some kind of error, like some kind of issue with the motor. So he had like a time frame to do it and everything, and so he started, you know, quickly got hooked into it, and he just blew the judges or the whoever was there um, watching his performance couldn't believe how efficient he was, and quickly found the problem, Don't know what the problem was, but anyway, he analysed it really quickly, pulled it apart, fixed it up, and got it running. And then he had a few other tests, and he just excelled in everything. And I said, yeah, you can start tomorrow. So, but he ended up finishing up at the sugarcane fields, and they were really sad he had to go because he kept in touch with them, writing, because back then it was really common to write letters. Um, Everybody used to write letters. I remember living at home. Even if someone lived on the other side of the city, you'd write a letter to each other. You didn't have telephones back then. Or if you did, the neighbour might have a telephone, and then if you had an urgent call, you'd knock at the door and go, "Hey, look, can I make a phone call?" But not everybody had a telephone. And we only got a telephone, I think, in the late 70s, something like that. I remember. And I remember occasionally Mum going across to our neighbours, Ciliados, to make a phone call. Someone to have a phone was like, wow, thing. And then eventually we got a phone too, and but yeah, everyone used to write letters. It's amazing. I used to love running out to the post box, collecting stamps. But anyway, Dad wrote them a letter. He kept in touch with them. And after a short time, they told him, "Oh, we need you back. They'll pay you more because they're knifing each other up again, the gangs." So Dad laughed. He goes, "Oh, why don't you just learn geography?" So yeah, that was interesting. Then yeah, so he got a reputation really quickly in the workshop. Again, being really good, he worked himself up in the workshop, and afterwards he went. I don't know how many years he worked there for. He also worked at a Ford Motor Company, at Eagle Farm, and then later he got a job at Eagle Farm in the housing and construction in the government. And he used to work again. There he used to work on a lot of army vehicles as well. They used to bring in those big amphibious boats. I remember I went to the workshop once as a kid. These big amphibious aluminium boats. They used in New Guinea and Vietnam. Those big things. Can't remember what they call them. I used to know. Anyway, and other vehicles as well. And he even said where he assumes he got sick from during the nuclear testing in the British were doing in mid Central Australia, around Adelaide, Northern Adelaide, or what they call it, South Australia. That's what I'm trying to think of. In a lot of the vehicles that they used, they brought into his workshop, and he was working on them, laying on. They were all radioactive, and he claims, because he always tried to work out how he got cancer, he had struggled with cancer and leukemia later when we were born. So yeah, when we were born, he had 4 kids: me, my sister Nikki, twin, Erica, and Tibby, and he had a mortgage. Then he got diagnosed with leukemia. So, but back then the doctors didn't tell you had leukemia. So he was in a hospital with the doctor, and back then his English wasn't that hard either. So still, and the doctor said, "You got to stay in hospital." And my father said, "Me stay in hospital? No way. I've got 4 kids. I've got a mortgage to pay." Because he started feeling weak, tired all the time. And then they said, "Look, you got to stay, And then he said, "No." And they didn't even tell him what he had. Because back then the doctor didn't tell you if what sickness you had. So they used to keep a secret from you. So I said, no, I've got to go to work. Well, they did all right, and then they gave him like a suitcase full of medicine. And I said, "You take this every day. You got to take this, and this amount of pills," and and they started taking it. It was like oral chemo, and he didn't know what it was, and he was whatever they wrote down it would take, like in the morning, midday, lunch, or afternoon. After 3 days, he said he felt like absolute shit. He said he felt worse than what he did before, you know. And they also told him what he could eat, what he couldn't, you know. Gave him a list of food. And then he, after a week, he said, this is shit, you know. So he grabbed it. He said, if he's going to die, he's going to die his own. He's going to try, not going to get someone else to kill him. He'll try and work it out himself. So he grabbed the whole box, chucked it in the bin. Then he started eating and experimenting with food. Um, when he started giving him strength, then he focused on that kind of food, you know. So he started eating a lot of vegetables and fruit, and a lot of the stuff they told him not to eat, he actually ate and started feeling better from it because he experimented. He tasted it, and if he felt better, then he continued. If he didn't, then he stopped it, you know. Because some of the foods he had a few allergies, you know, like pineapple. But it dropped his blood. It made him really, his blood pressure for some reason drop. There's something in it, um, because he always had low blood pressure actually, and that kind of took it to the limit where he just passed out, you know. So he yeah, so he struggled, you know. He struggled with leukemia, and then he actually cured himself just by eating the right foods. And then about 5 years after, he cut himself in a workshop. He had to go into the doctor to Royal Brisbane Hospital to get stitches. While he was in there, the doctor, what they do is they used to have these like binded with big steel like staples. You push it through and you bend over, and then every time you went in, you put the card. It's like a cardboard. You put the cardboard on, and then you shoot them, and then they write down what issue you had. Anyway, the doctor, the nurse brought his name out, you know, put him in front. He's reading because they used to always read the previous diagnosis or what he was in for. And he started reading, the doctor started reading it, and started reading it, looking at Dad, reading it. And he said, what's your name? He goes, oh, Peter Chikosh. He says, where were you born? What date of birth and stuff? And he goes, this and this, and it matched what was on the card. He goes, oh, you're supposed to be you're supposed to be dead. And he goes, yeah, I'm dead. I just came back to haunt you. So even then, he had a sense of humour, you know, like as if he was a ghost. And then the doctors were so astonished what had happened, actually sent out a crew from the university to diagnose his food, what he ate, and how he beat leukemia. So, and it actually came out twice later in life. He had bowel cancer, and he ended up again. He was always trying to, because as I said, he never really trusted anybody, especially he used to educate himself a lot, read, and a lot of he started already seeing back then how the medicine was going in the wrong direction, you know, and he used to kind of mix. Like the only time he'd take medicine when it was just a last resort, you know. Like I remember even when he had heart problems, like around 80, only around his 80s, where he really needed it. That's when he started taking the heart pills. Even then, he tried to regulate his heart by dropping his salt or increasing his salt intake and shit like that, you know. Not eating too much, because if you ate too much garlic, it thinned the blood, or onion. So he really paid attention to the fine details of diet. And chili, tell you what, that's what cured his bowel cancer and stomach cancer, because he had tumours in his stomach. And they couldn't believe it. They said, chili? Chili? It's the last thing they thought. And what actually happened was, a lot of people didn't even, the doctors wouldn't even think of this. They had all those little bird's eye chilies, bushes everywhere through the garden. And anyway, he used to collect them and eat. Next to his meal, he used to have a little plate, 4 or 5 of them, with and he didn't like eat it separately. He just eat it with his meal, like a mouthful of food and a bite. And so kind of diluted with food. It wasn't like just eating 5 chilies off the bush. And what had happened was the chili was what actually doing it used to go across the tumor in his stomach on bowel, and what it did was it stimulated the like made it feel the burning sensation, and because it kind of was a little bit like antiseptic as well, it also triggered the immune system to go there to think it was to heal something. So it already triggered the immune system from one section and the other end with the chili, and then the tumors used to shrink. Um, so yeah, and the doctors couldn't believe it. They said, "Wow, this is." So he, as I said, he cured himself from cancer as well. And they came out again later in life to check out his diet. And he also we used to have carob trees. In Hungarian, we call them Santianos caniad. Um, and for that, because it was really high in fibre and heaps of nutrition in those carob. You know, it was like these about this long, and it smelled like chocolate. Oh, the aroma was beautiful. And he used to grate them down. They have seeds in it. He grate them down. I used to remember grating them as well for him. Like we'd be grating them. You make it a real fine, like not powder, but a bit rougher. And he used to make big how do you call it? Used to mix it with flour and fruit, nuts, and make like a pastry. It's like but this high, tip it in, and it'd grow, and then he'd slice it up and just eat it as like after dinner, like a cake. And again, it was the healthiest thing ever, and that's really good for his digestive system. Um, and he loved nuts, always walnuts, Brazil nuts. So he had a very good balanced diet. Um, yeah, so yeah, it's cool. I really admire that. I don't sit on my ass. Kind of. A lot of people feel sorry for themselves. Never, Dad, never. Okay, he was crook at times, but it never stopped him, you know. And he loved orchids. He got into orchids big time and gardening. A lot of times he'd be out along the garden, like out in the, say, walking on the street or in a botanical garden, anywhere. He'd see something, he'd snip up, he'd have a little, like a little pocket knife, like a Swiss Army knife in his pocket usually. Just cut a little branch off, go home, stick it in the ground. A couple of months later, it got root, you know. So a lot of the plants he didn't have to buy. A lot of times he grafted them. Um, so he learned a lot of tricks he bought from Europe to because back then because he lived in like an agricultural part, they learned all the tricks, grafting fruit trees and um, how to um, how to raise the pH in soil. I remember going down to the Eagle Farm, Ascot racecourse. That's at all the bags. Well, Dad shoveled the horse manure in there, you know. And we go down and get heaps of horse manure all the time, and put it in the garden for the roses and veggies and just sprinkle around. And he used to keep them like just chucked into one of the sheds, and then through the months he just use them up, you know. Strawberries, used to love it. I remember he grew strawberries as well. Um, yeah, so yeah, and he was in an orchid society where he used to again a lot of the guys used to pay big bucks for these expensive orchids, and Dad used to just watch the trading post, and a lot of people if they're deceased or some he'd pick up bargain orchids, you know, from say two people were in the orchids, someone died, other person probably didn't have experience or passion for it. Dad pick them up, just fill up his boot, you know, and he actually made his big greenhouse in the back of the yard as well for it. And so yeah, it was cool. He ended up getting into that too, and he used to go to the Husby Orchid Society, and they used to have the competitions, but to the point where nobody, you weren't allowed to label your how they call it, plants, and then the judges come in, and he used to win he had so many ribbons, and there was this competition always. There were all these guys who were really prideful. They go study, all the fancy ways of orchid, growing. some of them, you know, and then when Dad used to beat them, they used to get really pissed off, you know. Yeah, Dad couldn't believe it. They'd always, you can see that they got grumpy about it. And Dad used to be a bit of a shit stirrer, you know, and cheeky. And yeah, so at the end, he enjoyed it that much. He used to actually go and have classes where he taught newcomers, beginners, how to repot, um, the basics of orchid growing. He used to go to the Orchid Society. He used to love it. And he was very social. He loved doing that kind of stuff. Even his apprentices during when he was, they used to really encourage them to continue studying, you know, and even got a couple of the guys into engineering because he said, look, when you go to college, get this degree, that degree, don't do what I'm doing. You're a smart boy. Move up, you know. And even I remember bumping into some of these guys when they found out my name was Chikosh. Occasionally, if I went to like somewhere, because it's not a very common name, they go, "Oh, is your father Peter?" He said, "Oh, I was his apprentice. Really good man. You know, amazing. Really cool to hear that." And sometimes they even bought around other because it was a federal government he worked for, housing department, and sometimes if they couldn't fix it in another part of Australia, they'd actually ship it to his workshop and he'd be working on it. And also, I used to shake. A lot of time the engineers would come down with a plan, and he'd shake his head. That's not going to work, you know. And then again the engineer would get pissed off that the tradesman was telling him what to do. But Dad said, look, if you want, I'll do it like that, but it's not going to work. He'd do it like that, and it'd break, it wouldn't work. And then the guy would come back, oh, keyboard, God, Peter, well, we'll do it your way. Even though they blow the budget all the time, you know, eventually a lot of time after a while the engineers used to come to Dad and go, well, what do you think of my plan? And they discuss it together, you know. So, but there was a trouble with the foreman. He was a Freemason actually, and a big arsehole. I remember Dad used to have a lot of issues with him because the guy was again they got put in there without not many skills, and Dad didn't like dishonesty. If he saw someone was a bludger or had a bad attitude or character, I tell you what, the guy would know about it quickly. And your Dad didn't care if he was a manager or not. And this guy actually, eventually even forced my father out of the workshop. It was that bad. But the only thing keeping him there was his work quality. Because when he got cancer and stuff, they wanted to get rid of him back then because of that. And then when he came back, they wanted him to work on get him out of the workshop and start removing asbestos roofs off the inaugural army barracks and stuff. And Dad said, you can stick it up your ass. He had too much pride. He'd rather retire. Thing is, because he had to retire early, he didn't get superannuation or anything. But he had enough money saved anyway, so then he just lived off the pension and very good at budgeting, so he never had an issue with money. And I'll get back to some other earlier stories because that was his later life. So he also spoke about when he went to the first came to Australia at Ford Motor Company. This one was cool. He while he was at Ford Motor Company, they had these big limousines there, and he asked because he got on well with the fleet guy who had the car, where the vehicles were coming in, and I think he was also European, and he said to the guy, look, we can have a bit of fun, you know, with the limousine. What they did was they went cruising around the city in Brisbane, and they parked the car, and then they acted like they were because it was such a rare and fancy car. They acted like they were how do they call it, scouts for movie from to filmmakers, I should say, producers, and they were filling the girls into going to interview, for a movie, and so what happened? So as they were cruising around, there were many different girls, and they said, "Oh, next Monday morning, you come for an interview at Lennon's Hotel, at such and such a time in the morning." So the girls, I remember that he said something like, they ended up going for a drive on the Monday morning. There's a workshop up at Spring Hill, in a normal car past in the overalls, not dressed up, like. And the next morning, on Monday morning, I think it was 9 in the morning, there's about 20, 30 girls lining up in front of the Lennon's Hotel, thinking that they're going to be interviewed by some movie, film being production. I don't know. He did something stupid like that. I remember him telling me. That's when they were working at Ford Motor Company. Another one, when they went to the Blue Moon Hotel. Back then, you couldn't go to, they wouldn't let you in. You had to be dressed to the T's, collar, tie. But back then, everybody dressed well. Even Dad did his own tailor. Even in Europe, Dad had his own tailor. Everyone had their own tailor for suits, clothing. They measure you up. You go pick your fabric, and then I don't know how many weeks later they had your clothes ready. Even shoemakers. Back then, there used to be good craftsmen, and in Europe, Dad had his own tailor, even in George Street. And then later, the tailors slowly died out when all this mass rag trade changed into the mass manufacturing. With the My department stores all that opened, and Walton's and David Jones and all these things started opening up, then it kind of destroyed the rag trade. Or it changed. Just like changed. But he told me that he went to the Blue Moon Hotel, but you couldn't go there unless you had a girl. And then you'd have to go with a girl. They wouldn't let you in otherwise. And there you had the custom when someone tapped you on the shoulder, you had to, the other guy could dance with your partner, And they used to cause a lot of friction and fights in dance halls. Because the guy, they'd be fighting over the girl. Sometimes the girl didn't want to dance with the guy. Then the guy go, look, he doesn't dance with you, and then the fight would break out, So, and the only other trouble was the American sailors. American sailors used to come in, because they had money, they were allowed to go into the clubs. It didn't matter if they had a girl or not. So what happened, they go in a big group, and then they'd be hassling all the Aussie guys, or anybody in there, with their girls, And because they had money, a lot of times the girls were obviously looking at the wallet rather than the... And the Aussie guys used to get jealous and that as well, so it caused a lot of trouble. There's actually a few good stories of Aussie guys, I remember, from that era. Used to talk about a lot of the pub brawls and club brawls they used to have with the US soldiers. So I remember Dad going in and to the Blue Moon Hotel. Used to have really good dance music there, live music. He went with a girl, and as they were dancing, the American soldiers were really loud and rowdy. Kept coming over and hassling her, and she kept telling them that she doesn't want to dance, And if the girl doesn't want to dance, then she doesn't have to dance, I think she might have had one or two dances, and then they were a bit rough and touching her up, and she said no. And then they kept hassling her, and Dad said no, because Dad was short, he was only small, and they were pretty cocky back then, the American soldiers, because they thought they were untouchable. And I remember Dad said, they were dancing, and they came over tap. And Dad was polite. He said, no, she doesn't want to dance. And then they pushed him, like nudged him, and that was it. He was good at judo, so when they went to push him, he just carried it through, flipped the guy through the crowd into the other US soldiers. And then they all came, and He flipped him around the room, with jiu-jitsu or judo throws. And then the MPs came in and to break it all up, And when they saw Dad was so small, they couldn't believe. Said, "This, you get the U.S. soldiers. This little guy beat you up. You should be embarrassed." They were really embarrassed. The U.S. soldiers that such a small guy had been throwing them around the room, And so yeah, and then they got disciplined by the MP. Dad got out of it without a scratch. But he said he had a few scruffs with U.S. soldiers back then. But it wasn't only Dad. I know it was very common in Brisbane at the time, all over Australia, with the U.S. soldiers when they came into town. And and Dad was another thing he was surprised about. He couldn't believe the Aussie mentality when the people used to get drunk in the pubs, and the police would just be waiting outside the pub in paddy wagons. And then as soon as someone walk out and stumble, they'd jump on them and throw them in the paddy wagon. Even if you just had a stumble, you couldn't even go, "Hey, look, I just," And he couldn't believe it. He goes, "Fuck, this is freedom." He goes, but Dad never drank much anyway. He wasn't a drinker. But he was surprised that so easily the police would take you in. Like in Australia, in Yugoslavia, he said what they do, if you were drunk, they put you in a taxi, They say, oh, they call you a taxi, the policeman, and send you home safely. Not throw you up, beat you up, put you in a watch house. So he couldn't believe it. He goes, oh. So he said the police had a different kind of attitude back in Europe. They have more, I don't know. That was one of his stories. He told me also about a story, the YMCA. I think it was either the City YMCA. I think it's the City YMCA. One on Ann Street. I think it's Ann Street before you just come up into the valley. I used to go there, to do some workouts occasionally. We used to have a gym there. Not often, but occasionally went there. And one of his mates that he lived with said, "Oh, hey, guess what? There's this judo master, jiu-jitsu master come in, and I'd really like you to meet him, and he kept badgering Dad to come down and meet him. He was only there for a short period. He just came to Australia to do some kind of a conference or seminar. And anyway, this guy talked him into going down and meeting his jiu-jitsu instructor, from Japan, with some grand master. And because he knew Dad did judo and grappling and was a good fighter. And he wanted him to meet him, and because this guy was doing judo classes in or jiu-jitsu, I think judo or jiu-jitsu classes in YMCA. So Dad went down because he was kind of curious as well. And then the guy, because it's really interesting, the way Dad learned martial arts and grappling and everything was they were very realistic when it came to techniques. And when this master was showing techniques, it was kind of so mechanical and so the students used to just give they didn't know any counterattacks. It was kind of very. Anyway, Dad didn't like he thought it was very unrealistic the way he was teaching. And then Dad didn't say anything. He just stood there watching. And this other guy kept putting pressure on him to go out and talk, do some techniques with him. Dad said no, because he didn't want to embarrass this jiu-jitsu instructor, because he saw that he was a lot of techniques that wouldn't work in the street. But he wasn't the kind of guy to embarrass him, And then this master actually called him out, He said, "Oh, I heard you do this and this and that." And anyway, so Dad kind of gave him his hand to do a technique, and the guy try and twisted his arm and tried to force him down on the ground, And instead of going, Dad automatically went into a counter, And like as he went to twist him down, instead of falling down, he twisted his arm and it went up into his stomach, like um, he just redirected the flow straight up into his stomach and elbowed it up into the up here, and he knocked the air out of him, and he went down like a bag of potatoes. Um, but Dad felt embarrassed, because he was supposed to be some big grand master. Just one quick technique, he was down like a bag of potatoes. So yeah, and everybody was kind of shocked. Dad felt like shit. He actually thought he told the guy, see, I didn't want to come down. So anyway, but he even laughed when my brother and I were doing taekwondo, and some of the techniques, he said, that shit won't work. He laughed. He goes, those kicks, those everything's telegraphed. Taekwondo. You can't do those kicks in the street. You're going to slip and fall on your ass. So he used to laugh at us. And it was so true. A lot of that shit doesn't work in the street. You haven't got the right clothing to do a kick most of the time, especially back then. We used to wear those tight jeans. And then you had the surface of the floor had to be good. If you had shit shoes on, if it was carpet, or you never knew where you were, what the surface was. You can easily lose your footing. So Dad always said low kicks, to the shin, to the groin, to the knee, to the top, hit the top of the foot, but don't go above the waist. He used to be, and everything he said was true, always. So yeah, we wasted a few years doing taekwondo, but what do you do? Kids always think they know better. So, but it looks fancy. Dad said it looks good. It's good to keep fitness, but that's all. But you might as well do ballet, he said. So it was interesting. And he also used to like spearfishing. He had this, and he was very good at inventing stuff. Like when he was spearfishing, he realised a lot of times you'd shoot, and if there was a shark in the area, in your spear gun, you had no defence. There's a lot of times the blood from the would attract sharks and stuff, so you had no defence. So what he did, he actually designed a spear gun, a normal spear, and he welded a bayonet to the end of it, a spike. So there, aluminium spike. So what he did was, and he just came up with inventions like that. So what happened if he shot, and if there was a shark around, he could use that to stab the shark, because it was a gun in his hand, and keep it at bay. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff. If he would have patented it, he probably would have made good money out of it. Another thing he did was he invented this wheelbarrow, and he put a drum brakes on the front with whereas you had the handle, you had like a brake caliper, and he had drum brakes on the front. So, and we used to go have a steep driveway and a kind of steep block. So every time we were concreting, taking sand or concrete in the barrow or bricks or whatever, he used to be a pain in the ass, and because you have to run down the driveway and take a sharp left because there's a curve. If you didn't have brakes, you lose your load, And so Dad made up a special drum brake on the front of the wheelbarrow, and that way you'd go down and you'd be able to brake the whole wheelbarrow down the And we had these guys come in. There's a bigger concrete job to be done, and these guys came in concreting through a gang, and Dad had the wheelbarrow like there on the they could see it. This guy said, wow, that has got to be the most wicked design he's ever said. He said, it makes so much sense. And he asked Dad, can I use it? While he was doing the concreting. And the other guy's using the standard barrow with no bloody brakes. And this guy, he loved it. He goes, wow. And it was unheard of at the time. But what I believe is later, someone said they started making barrows later with brakes back in the 90s or something. But this is all through the 70s and 80s, and he also made this. It was like a pontoon with a big fan on the back. I don't know whether it was a two-stroke motor. And but the thing is, the time he finished it, he was divorced from Mum, and I didn't actually see him use it. But he said he had taken down the Redcliffe, and he took it down. He put a seat in the middle. It was like looked like a big mosquito with a pontoon, two pontoons, and then you start it up, and then it's cruising on water. The trouble is, you have to get the right buoyancy from the front, because at first it kind of dipped into the water, and later on he had to put more floats and to balance it all out. But the trouble was, he was so far from the beach. We were at Windsor, and to take it down on a trailer was a bit of a pain in the ass for him. So eventually he just stayed under the house. I remember it was sitting in the bottom garage for a very long time. Then he sold it on a trading post. Some guy came around and bought it. So yeah, so you always experiment with stuff. Yeah, we had welding machines. He had a turning machine at home. Um, Shitloads of tools. So yeah, a lot of times. And if he didn't have it, he used to take it in a workshop, and then do a bit of how they call it. There's a special name for it. When you finish all your work, then you're allowed to do your own work in a workshop. I don't know. It had a special name. Can't remember. Um, what else can I talk about him? He loved dancing. He learnt a lot of the boogie woogie, swing, rock and roll, all in Yugoslavia. And they used to always watch the movies from the States, go to the cinemas, and learn all the steps. And yeah, they reckon they used to have big dance parties with good bands. And so you learnt all the boogie woogie era. And I remember even Hungarian club, he had some, they dance, mum and dad, they do everything from the swing, waltz, polka, Hungarian folk dancing as well, Csárdás they call it, tango, cha-cha, all that Latin stuff, and they knew it all, and they did it so well. They used to like to start the dance. When the band started, there used to be at least the first, second or third people used to always get up and start the dance at the Hungarian club. Used to go to the Italian club, the German club. There were three main clubs I used to go to. German club was at the Gabba. Hungarian club used to be at different points depending who the organisers were. And Town Club was the one down at Newmarket. The main one was at Newmarket I used to go to. I think there was one at Castledown later, but that was in the later years. It was fun going as kids, because it was like family. The whole family would go. Wouldn't it be like, and yeah, it was, and the whole Hungarian community was there. It was fun as kids. And I remember a lot of Aussie kids, they never did that kind of stuff. So I'm really glad that we did so many things on weekends. Like we went to Redcliffe, Shorncliffe, fishing with Dad, and down the beach. Visited relatives a lot. There's a lot of cousins and that. Can't believe it. And at the same time, we used to help them work around the house, doing brickwork, concreting. I used to hate the cleaning up the steel with the wire brush, and then used to be a tedious job, but we did it. We never got paid for it. They're just chores you had to do. Pocket money. I don't understand people these days. You just did it. It was like teamwork, family. And then we had chickens and some rabbits at one stage, not for too long. Like aquarium fish. We were up to getting the every Friday night. Dad go down to Shorncliffe or Eagle Farm or Pinkham Bar fishing, and then the following day we clean the fish. And we'd have freeze them or eat them the following night. So it was a lot of fun. I'll tell you what. And we had set dinners, sit down dinners at the same time. They were around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. It used to be 5:30. Roughly then we'd all sit down as a family. It's just routine. It was very it's great. We had 3 courses. We had soup. Mum make always a soup, main, and then dessert. Some of the food was just, I take it for granted now. Actually, some of that food is better than what I actually ate in Hungary. Some of it, because she just had a heart for cooking. She had a heart for cooking, I tell you what. And she put so much detail into getting that recipe 100%. She had all handwritten recipes, in books. So it was cool. Even Dad used to do sausages, Hungarian sausages. and his specialty was making fish soup because Mum didn't like making it because fish was a bit of a mess, messy. But you have to put the head in and all that, and Mum said, "Ah, you can do that." So to do that. Um, They used to get the fruit markets a lot and get the broccoli markets and get big boxes of apples or apricots and peaches by bulk. So it was clever, clever ways of saving money. Um, and be having a big family, you go through it fairly quickly anyway. Um, what else? We had banana trees. I remember I used to hook it up into the house, and then we'd have bananas, mango trees. Never liked the mangoes. They were stringy mangoes. If it was bowen mango, it'd be fine. Isabella grapes. He had, again, I wasn't keen on them, but they had thick skins, so the wasps and bees, and they couldn't get into it. That's why. But they had a big seed in it. That's why I wasn't keen on it. Um, yeah, actually, you know what else he did? I didn't even talk about that. He went to New Guinea, Goroka, back in the late 50s. He went there to throw some money together because you didn't have to pay tax back then. He worked in the gold mines, and he loved. He had this guy who made him offer to. He worked up there and threw a good money together, good deposit for a home. So he went up there and he told about how the black fellas, up there, he got a servant boy too, where he looked after all your like ironing clothing, like basic cleaning in the flat for next to nothing while you went did your work, And he also said, I remember because of malaria, they used to spray DDT through the whole village. The truck would come through just spraying it all through the air all the time. So back then they were still spraying DDT everywhere against malaria. And what else? He talked about the guys with the. He said the Highlanders up on the hills were all short, and then down by the. And he showed the mudmen, with the. Just put like mud, like a helmet on with the eyes. He had photos with them, and actually spoke about this guy as well who had leprosy. And the doctors went there to help. It was like the Red Cross. They went there to help him. And they said, look, we've got to help you, but we've got to amputate you from the knee down, because it's so bad. And the guy goes, okay, but can I have it back? And he thought they didn't know what he wanted it back for. Next when he got it back, he was cooking it, and he ended up eating the rest of the. He actually cooked it up and ate it. Couldn't believe it. He goes, oh, this is nuts. Then he spoke about. Port Moresby. He was in Port Moresby as well. He had to go there occasionally, and he went to a little like a candy bar, snack bar, to get some ice cream and soft drink. It was this hot day, and he was standing at the door with his just shorts and a shirt, and he had I think back then those Federer hats were very popular, standing there. And the UK had Navy in there, or the English boys were there. So he just standing at the door, just ordered his ice cream, and he noticed some UK guys, 6, 7 of them go in to get some ice cream and that as well. And this young girl, she was only young, he said about 15, 16, went in there as well to get a ice cream. And they started touching her up and giving her a hard time, and the poor girl started crying, leave me alone. And they were real rough with her. And Dad said, hey, stop it. And because Dad was small, they laughed at him, And Dad had this they said Dad just smiled at them. He had this smile like you don't. Yeah, that he said once he smiled, that was it. That was like a lot of guys said. Dad had this smile that once I saw that smile, it was like a switch in him. Like you wouldn't see on his face what was going to happen. It was going to explode. And so what happened was, yeah, these English guys or Navy laughed at Dad, you know, and then Dad said, grabbed a girl and pushed her, you know, behind him. And then he goes, I told you to leave her alone, you know. And then they went to push him, you know, and push him around as well. And then he just said they went flying through the air because he was trying to do judo on them. And he said he threw a few of them around on the footpath. And then the girl was so surprised. And then he said he threw 2, 3 of them around the footpath. Then he said, "What about you boys?" You know, and they said, "No, okay, you're fine." So then the dad told the girl, you know, she all right to get home? She said, yeah. So and then she thanked him, and then she ended up scooting home. But yeah, he didn't. Let's see, he was never scared of more than one guy. Um, and he used to go. He loved. He had my brother's got some good photos where he's on his boat and he's got snorkels on, and he used to go for because he said it's beautiful. Some of the beaches around. Dad used to love swimming, and also the beaches. He used to go. You know, getting lobsters, pearls, spearfishing up there. And what he actually won, I did really forgot this one. Actually, he went up there and he used to go get lobsters. And lobsters used to be some of them in holes, you know, as you went down. And they used to go in a group. And one of the guys, he went up, Dad went up, and the other guy was down under the water for a bit too long. And he thought, oh shit, what's going on? So Dad went down, and then he noticed the guy was kind of stuck. His hand was stuck under a rock, you know. Dad quickly went down to have a look what's going on, and bloody hell, Dad had put his hand in a moray eel hole, and the moray eel had hold of his fingers. And what they do is they grab your finger and hold it, and they puff themselves up, and you can't pull your hand out because they puff them out like a big lump of muscle in the rock. So Dad, you know, knew that if the guy doesn't get up, he'll drown. So Dad quickly had to think quick, and he just grabbed his diving knife, fucking chopped his fingers off, chopped his finger off, and then the guy released the guy, and then the guy came up with less fingers, but he had to do it so the guy would survive. So yeah, the guy was fingerless afterwards, but he thanked him. And then another time he said he caught a sea snake. You know, they're the most poisonous snakes. Because a sea snake was they can attack you occasionally, and they were one of them. They were swimming towards him, you know, because they're territorial sometimes. And he ended up trapping one with his spear. He held its head down with the end of the spear into the sand, and then he got hold of it, and then he took it down onto the beach. He said he bludgeoned its head, even skinned it. Then he threw it back into the water, and it swam off. It was amazing. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the New Guinea stuff because I didn't even think about talking about that. So and actually he loved sailing boats. He had a mate who had a sailing boat that took him up there because he was a guy that said, "Oh, I'll come up to New Guinea, make some money." So he did some fingering and turning in the gold mines up there. So he really loved it. He was a real adventurer. As I said, he loved swimming, and all those tropical islands up there, he just reckons it was beautiful. And back there it was still pretty untouched back in those periods. So he knocked a bit of money and then came back to Australia, and that was his deposit for his home. And that's when he got together with my mother. So, and then our family started. So let me see what else we got here. Well, that's about it. I think that's all my notes. He didn't like unions. I remember that. And I remember every time we went down fishing to Shorncliffe, Used to be a huge, big Freemasonry lodge down there, Sandgate there. As you went down, before you went down the pier, it was kind of in the main area of, before you got into the main part of Sandgate. You go, well, he'd always point, you go, they're dangerous. Back then he used to say Freemasons were dangerous. He knew. But you see these big limousines of family go to their picnics, they dance, big picnics. And I used to always go, wow, Dad, wouldn't it be cool going, what are they doing? Because you see big families having, they go, oh, that's dangerous. Don't go, they're Freemasons. So he used to have families there in the gardens. It was really posh. They parked in there having picnics and kicking the football around. I used to go, oh, shit, that looks good. And Dad used to warn us, no, they're Freemasons. And it's true. It's true. Freemasons are bastards. So, yeah, he was right about that. So, yeah, so anyway, that was, but what I was going to, I know I'm writing his eulogy for Dad, and I remember a key part was he was firm but fair. He would offer advice and provide us with opportunities to learn responsibility, but also allowed us to learn from our mistakes. More importantly, he taught us by example he set in his own life. Reflecting back on how my father challenged our actions, times made us frustrated. However, as the old song goes, all you need is love. Even though from a certain viewpoint that statement is true, the reality is that love is not all we needed. For if we had the most loving, agreeing Father to ever walk this earth, he would never have transformed us to excel. Now, Dad's love at times wasn't a sympathetic love that seeks to make people feel good in a limited situation. He expressed love that compelled us to rise above our limitations and become more. This is a love to tune into. The all-agreeing human love is not power. Most people see it as a soft, gentle, and therefore it does not rock the boat. It does not compel one on to transcend. It's true love to help awaken people to their highest potential, to help them manifest that potential. And that is the love. And this is a love received from Dad, empowering us to be more. Sadly, on 11th of March 2010, Dad passed away. And yeah, no words can describe the loss. But anyway, he'll always be one of the most influential men in our lives. And Dad, if you can hear me now, we love you. Cheers, guys.